Narrator: What I saw in Judge Laika's courtroom today was not the kind of case people forget when they walk out the door. It was quiet at first, almost too quiet. The people in the room sat close together, watching an older woman named Margaret Hill sit at the plaintiff's table. She was 60 years old. Her hands rested one over the other, but they did not stay still. Her fingers kept moving, slowly rubbing the edge of a folded piece of paper. Across from her sat Daniel Brooks, also 60. He looked calm from a distance, but if you watched closely, you could see the tension around his mouth. He kept his eyes on the table. Every now and then, he looked toward Margaret. But each time he did, he quickly looked away. The case was about $120,000. But as I listened, it became clear that the money was only part of the story. Margaret said Daniel had borrowed the money from her under a 20-year oral agreement. She said he promised to repay her slowly and steadily over time. She trusted him because they had known each other for many years. But according to Margaret, the agreement was broken in 2023. She claimed Daniel stopped making the payments and refused to return the money that remained. Daniel did not agree with her version of events. He said the money was not a loan in the way Margaret described it. He said there had been confusion between them. He said the two of them had spoken many times over the years, and that Margaret was now treating old conversations like a written contract. That was the problem. There was no signed loan agreement. No official contract sat inside a folder. Instead, Margaret had brought bank withdrawal records, text messages, and the memory of one eyewitness who had seen part of the arrangement. Judge Laika entered and took her place. The room became still. She looked first at Margaret, then at Daniel. Her expression was calm, but serious. She did not look rushed. She looked like someone who understood that both people sitting before her had carried this dispute for a long time. Judge Laika: Ms. Hill, I want you to speak clearly and slowly. Tell me what happened in your own words. Margaret took a breath. Margaret: I trusted him, Judge. That is the part people may not understand. I did not hand over that money to a stranger. I gave it to someone I believed would keep his word. Her voice shook slightly. Daniel moved in his chair. Judge Laika: Mr. Brooks, you will have your chance to respond. For now, listen carefully. Daniel nodded once. Margaret looked down at the paper in her hands. Margaret, it started more than 20 years ago. Daniel told me he needed help. He said he was trying to fix his financial situation. He promised he would repay me over time. Not all at once. He said we had an understanding. She paused. The room remained silent. Margaret: For years, I believed he was paying me back. Sometimes the payments were small. Sometimes they came late. But I kept trusting him. Then in 2023, the payment stopped. I asked him what was happening, and he told me not to worry. Her eyes became wet, but she kept speaking. Margaret: After that, he stopped answering me the way he used to. Then he said I had no right to ask for the money because there was nothing in writing. Daniel finally looked up. Daniel: That is not what happened. Judge Laika lifted one hand. Judge Laika: Mr. Brooks, wait until I call on you. Daniel closed his mouth, but his face tightened. Margaret looked at him for only a second. Then she looked back at the judge. Margaret: I never thought I would have to sit in a courtroom and prove that a promise was made. And that sentence changed the mood in the room. People who had been sitting back began leaning forward. Because the case was no longer just about bank records. It was about whether a promise made between two people could still matter after 20 years. Narrator. Margaret opened a folder and placed several pages in front of her. Her hands were more steady now. She explained that the first large payment had not been one single transfer. It had happened through several bank withdrawals. She said she withdrew money from her savings account and gave it to Daniel in different amounts. Some withdrawals were small, some were much larger. The total, according to her records, was $120,000. Daniel watched the papers closely. His eyes followed every page Margaret placed on the table. Judge Laika looked at the records, then looked back at Margaret. Judge Laika. Ms. Hill, these records show money leaving your account. What proves that the money went to Mr. Brooks? Margaret. I gave it to him directly. Some of it was cash. Some of it went through the bank. I wrote notes for myself because I knew I would need to remember what each withdrawal was for. Judge Laika. Do the notes say loan? Margaret swallowed. Margaret. Some do. Some say his name. Some say the reason he gave me. I did not know I was creating evidence. I thought I was helping someone I knew. Daniel leaned forward. Daniel. She wrote those notes years later. Judge Laika turned toward him. Judge Laika. Mr. Brooks. Daniel. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Laika. You will speak when asked. Daniel nodded again. His face showed frustration, but he stayed quiet. Margaret continued. She said the first agreement was made during a difficult period in Daniel's life. He had told her he needed money to deal with several financial problems. He promised to repay her over 20 years. The promise had not been written down because at the time, neither of them thought they needed a lawyer or a formal document. Margaret said Daniel had made several payments over the years. She did not have every receipt, but she had bank records showing payments from Daniel to her. She also had text messages. Judge Laika asked her to explain the messages. Margaret picked up her phone. Margaret. These are messages from Daniel. He told me he knew he still owed me. He said he was trying to get things in order. He asked me to give him more time. Judge Laika. Did he ever write the exact amount he owed? Margaret shook her head slowly. Margaret. Not always, but he said things like, I have not forgotten what I owe you, and I will make it right. Daniel looked down. The people behind him remained quiet, but I could feel their attention moving between the two sides. Judge Laika read several messages. Her eyes moved slowly across the screen. Then she looked up. Judge Laika. Mr. Brooks, do you deny sending these messages? Daniel took a breath. Daniel. No, I sent them. Margaret's shoulders lowered slightly. It was the first moment in the hearing when something important had been admitted without an argument. But Daniel continued. Daniel. I sent them because I felt bad about the situation. That does not mean I agreed that I owed her $120,000. Margaret's lips pressed together. Her eyes became red. Margaret, you knew exactly what the money was. Judge Laika. Ms. Hill, please let him finish. Margaret nodded, but she looked hurt. Daniel rubbed his hands together. Daniel. I never promised the amount she is claiming. We talked about helping each other. We talked about money. But she is taking every conversation and adding it together. Judge Laika studied him. Judge Laika, are you saying you received no loan from Ms. Hill? Daniel hesitated. That hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but everyone noticed it. Daniel, I am saying it was not a formal loan agreement. Judge Laika, that did not answer my question. Daniel looked toward Margaret, then back to the judge. Daniel, I received money from her. Margaret lowered her eyes. That answer seemed to affect her more than anything else he had said. She had spent years trying to prove that money had changed hands. Now Daniel had admitted it. The question was what the money meant. 10 o'clock to 15 o'clock. Narrator. Judge Laika asked Margaret to describe the agreement in more detail. The courtroom became even quieter. Margaret sat with her back straight, but her voice sounded tired. Not weak. Tired. She said Daniel had asked for help because he was facing serious financial pressure. He told her he could not repay everything immediately. Instead, he suggested a 20-year plan. Margaret said they agreed that he would make regular payments. She said they did not decide on one fixed amount every month because Daniel's income changed. The understanding was that he would pay what he could and finish repaying the balance within 20 years. Judge Laika listened without interrupting. Judge Laika. Ms. Hill, when did the 20-year period begin? Margaret. It began when I gave him the first large amount. Judge Laika. And when was the final payment supposed to be made? Margaret. 20 years after that first agreement. Judge Laika. Do you have a written schedule? Margaret. No. Judge Laika. Do you have a written interest rate? Margaret. No, Judge. Judge Laika. Do you have a written list of every payment he was supposed to make? Margaret looked down. Margaret. No. Daniel shifted in his seat. The questions were fair, but they were difficult for Margaret. She had come to court with proof that money had moved between them. But a verbal agreement is much harder to show. Memory can fade. Conversations can be remembered differently. Years can change the meaning of words. Judge Laika looked at the bank records again. Judge Laika. Why did you wait until 2023 to demand the full balance? Margaret's face changed. This was clearly the question she had been afraid of. She took a slow breath. Margaret. Because I believed he would pay me. Judge Laika. Even after payments became irregular? Margaret. Yes. Judge Laika. Why? Margaret stared at the table for a moment. Margaret. Because I did not want to believe he was taking advantage of me. The words landed heavily. Daniel's mouth opened slightly, but he did not speak. Margaret continued. Margaret. When someone has been part of your life for 20 years, you do not wake up one morning and decide they are dishonest. You explain things. You give them time. You tell yourself they are under pressure. You tell yourself the next payment will come. Her voice cracked. She paused and wiped one tear from the corner of her eye. Margaret. I gave him time because I thought that was what decent people did. No one moved. Judge Laika's expression remained controlled, but her eyes softened. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Daniel. I never told her she would never get anything. Judge Laika turned toward him. Judge Laika. Mr. Brooks, are you saying you intended to repay some money? Daniel. Yes. Judge Laika. How much? Daniel looked down at his hands. Daniel. I do not know. Judge Laika. You do not know how much you intended to repay? Daniel. I knew I had received help. I did not understand it as a $120,000 debt. Judge Laika. Did you keep records? Daniel. No. Judge Laika. Did you ask Ms. Hill for a written statement of what you owed? Daniel. No. Judge Laika. Did you send her payments? Daniel. Yes. Judge Laika. Why? Daniel paused. Daniel. because I wanted to help her, because I knew she expected money from me.
Your Honor,
Margaret looked at
I
him.
have lived in that house.
Her face showed disappointment, not anger. That expression seemed to bother Daniel more than an accusation would have. Narrator. The judge moved to the text messages. Margaret had printed some of them and placed them in order by date. The oldest message was short. Daniel had written that he was sorry for being late. Another message said he had not forgotten. A later message said he needed more time. Then came the message from 2023. Margaret described it as the moment everything changed. She said she had sent Daniel a message asking when he planned to pay the remaining balance. She said she was no longer comfortable waiting without a clear plan. Daniel replied that he did not owe her the amount she was demanding. Margaret said she read that message many times. She had been sitting alone at her kitchen table when she saw it. She did not respond right away. She said her first reaction was disbelief. Margaret, I thought maybe he had misunderstood me. Then I read it again and again. I realized he was not confused. He was saying the agreement did not exist. Judge Laika looked at Daniel. Judge Laika, why did you write that she was demanding money you did not owe? Daniel, because I believed the amount was wrong.
I never intended.
Judge Laika,
We will now proceed with the hearing.
did you tell her the money had been a gift? Daniel hesitated. Daniel, I may have said that some of it was help. Judge Laika, some of it?
I
Daniel,
was not present when that
yes.
agreement was signed.
Judge Laika, which part was a gift? Daniel looked frustrated. Daniel,
Lead anyone.
I cannot separate it now.
That is the truth.
Judge Laika nodded
We will
slowly.
now proceed with the hearing.
Judge
Both
Laika,
parties will be fully heard.
that is part of the problem, Mr. Brooks. Daniel's face reddened. Margaret sat quietly. The judge asked her to explain the bank withdrawals. Margaret said she had withdrawn money on several dates. She remembered the reason for each withdrawal because the money had come from savings she had built over many years. She said she had not been wealthy. She had saved carefully. When Daniel asked for help, she had believed she was protecting someone from a temporary crisis. She said she had given up plans of her own because she expected the money to return. Judge Laika asked what those plans were. Margaret hesitated. Margaret, I had hoped to use the money for my home. Later, I thought it would help me when I stopped working. The room became still again. She did not say she had lost everything. She did not exaggerate. She simply explained that the money had been part of her future. That made the claim feel more personal. It was not money she had found lying around. It was money she had saved. Judge Laika, did Mr. Brooks know what the money meant to you? Margaret, yes. Judge Laika, how do you know? Margaret, I told him. I told him I was using my savings. I told him I needed him to keep his promise. Daniel shook his head. Daniel, she never said it was going to affect her future. Margaret turned toward him.
Answering me.
Margaret,
Didn't care anymore.
I told you that every time I asked you to pay. Judge Laika looked between them. Judge Laika, both of you need to understand something. This hearing is not about who can speak louder. It is about what can be shown. Margaret nodded. Daniel leaned back. The judge asked about the eyewitness. Margaret said the witness had been present during one important conversation. The witness had not seen every payment, but had heard Daniel describe the money as a loan, and had heard him talk about repaying Margaret over time. The eyewitness could not give an exact amount, but the witness remembered the words, 20 years. Daniel's expression changed immediately. He sat up straighter. Daniel, that conversation was not what she says it was. Judge Laika, you will have the opportunity to explain that. Daniel. She is using one conversation to create an agreement that never existed. Judge Laika. And you are saying the conversation did not include repayment? Daniel looked down. Daniel, we talked about helping each other. The judge made a note. The audience seemed to understand that the case was moving toward its most important question. Was help really a gift? Or was it a loan that Daniel had agreed to repay? Narrator. The eyewitness was not allowed to give a long speech about what happened, but the information from that person was reviewed carefully. The eyewitness had known both Margaret and Daniel for years. The witness had been present during a conversation in which Daniel discussed the money with Margaret. According to Margaret's account, Daniel said he would repay her over 20 years. Daniel remembered the conversation differently. He said the witness had only heard part of it. He said he had been under pressure at the time and was speaking generally. He said he never agreed to a specific debt of $120,000. Judge Laika returned to the bank records. Judge Laika. Mr. Brooks, I want to go through the payments you made. Do you recognize these transfers? Daniel? Yes. Judge Laika. Were these payments made to Ms. Hill? Daniel. Yes. Judge Laika. Why did you make them? Daniel. Because she helped me. Judge Laika. Did she ask for them? Daniel. Sometimes. Judge Laika. What did she say? Daniel. She would say I needed to keep paying. Judge Laika. Keep paying what? Daniel rubbed his forehead. Daniel. I assumed she meant the money I had received. Margaret looked toward the judge. Margaret. That is exactly what I meant. Judge Laika raised her hand. Judge Laika. Ms. Hill, please wait. Margaret nodded. The judge continued questioning Daniel. Judge Laika. Did you ever tell Ms. Hill that the payments were gifts from you to her? Daniel. No. Judge Laika. Did you ever ask her to return the money? Daniel. No. Judge Laika. Did you ever write that you had no obligation to pay anything? Daniel looked away. Daniel. Not in those words. Judge Laika. What words did you use? Daniel took a long breath. Daniel. I told her the amount was not correct. Judge Laika. That is not the same as saying you owed nothing, is it? Daniel did not answer. Judge Laika. Mr. Brooks? Daniel? No. The answer was quiet. Margaret lowered her head. For a moment, she looked as though she was trying not to cry. I noticed something about her during the hearing. She never smiled when Daniel admitted something that helped her case. She did not celebrate. She looked sad. That told me this was not about winning against a stranger. She wanted the court to recognize what she believed had happened between two people who once trusted each other. Judge Laika asked Margaret to describe the payment she had received. Margaret said Daniel had paid her several times, but the payments were inconsistent. Sometimes he sent money after she asked. Sometimes he sent money without a message. Sometimes months passed with nothing. She said she kept accepting the payments because she believed they were part of the promise. Judge Laika. Did you ever tell him the payments were not enough? Margaret. Yes. Judge Laika. How did he respond? Margaret. He said he would do better. Judge Laika. Do you have a message showing that? Margaret. Yes. She handed the phone forward. Judge Laika read it silently. Then she looked at Daniel. Judge Laika. Did you write, I will do better? Daniel. Yes. Judge Laika. What did you mean? Daniel looked toward Margaret. Daniel. I meant I would try to send more money. Judge Laika. Why would you send more money if you did not believe you owed her money? Daniel had no immediate answer. The courtroom waited. Finally, he said, Daniel, because I felt responsible for helping her. Judge Laika looked at him for several seconds. Then she turned back to the records. Narrator. At the halfway point, the case became less about whether Daniel had received money. That part was clear. The real question was whether Margaret had shown enough evidence to prove the terms of the agreement. The lack of a written contract made everything harder. Margaret had to rely on the pattern of conduct, the money going out, the payments coming back, the messages about owing money, the request for more time, the eyewitness who remembered Daniel talking about a 20-year repayment plan. Together, those pieces created a picture, but Judge Laika still examined every part carefully. She asked Margaret whether the original agreement had included interest. Margaret, no. Judge Laika, was there a specific monthly payment? Margaret, no fixed amount. Judge Laika, was there a specific date each month? Margaret, no. Judge Laika, was there a final date? Margaret, yes, 20 years from the beginning. Judge Laika, did you and Mr. Brooks write down the date? Margaret, no. Daniel shook his head slightly. Daniel, that is why I say there was no real agreement. Margaret turned toward him. Margaret, you knew the date. We talked about it. Daniel, we talked about many things. Margaret, you never said it was a gift. Daniel, you never said it was a formal loan. Margaret, I should not have needed a formal word with you. Judge Laika looked up. Judge Laika, both of you, stop speaking over each other. They fell silent. The judge's voice was firm but not harsh. She asked Daniel to explain why he believed the money was not a loan. Daniel, because Margaret helped me during a difficult time. She knew I was struggling. We did not sit down and sign anything. There was no schedule. There was no interest. She gave me money because she wanted to help. Judge Laika, did you understand that she expected the money to come back? Daniel looked uncomfortable. Daniel, I understood that she wanted me to pay her when I could. Judge Laika, that sounds like an expectation of repayment. Daniel, it was not the same as the agreement she is describing. Judge Laika, what part is different? Daniel looked toward the bank records. Daniel, the amount, the timeline, the way she says it was all one loan. Judge Laika leaned slightly forward. Judge Laika, do you dispute that the total amount she gave you was approximately $120,000? Daniel was quiet. Daniel, I cannot confirm that number. Judge Laika, why not? Daniel, because I did not keep the same records. Judge Laika, did you keep any records? Daniel, no. Margaret gave a small, tired laugh, but it was not a happy sound. Margaret, he kept every other paper in his life. Judge Laika looked at her. Judge Laika, Ms. Hill. Margaret, I am sorry. Daniel's face hardened. Daniel, she is making this personal. Margaret looked at him with tears in her eyes. Margaret, it has always been personal. That sentence stayed in the room. Even Judge Laika paused before continuing. The case involved money, but the injury Margaret described was betrayal. She believed Daniel had accepted her help, made payments for years, and then changed the meaning of the arrangement when repayment became difficult. Daniel believed Margaret was using old kindness to claim an amount that had never been clearly agreed upon. Both people were 60 years old. Both had lived long enough to know that memory can become a battleground. and both were now asking the judge to believe their version of the past. Narrator. Judge Laika asked Margaret to walk through the evidence one piece at a time. First came the bank withdrawals. Margaret explained that she had marked the dates and amounts. She said the withdrawals matched the times Daniel had asked for help. Then came the payments from Daniel. She showed that he had sent money back over the years. Some payments were large enough to stand out. Others were small, but the pattern mattered. Daniel had not sent one payment and forgotten the matter. He had continued sending money. Margaret said that was because both of them understood the money was being repaid. Judge Laika reviewed the text messages again. One message from Daniel said he was still working on the balance. Another said, "I know what I owe." Another said, "Please give me a little more time." Daniel admitted sending the messages, but he said the wording was emotional, not precise. Judge Laika. Mr. Brooks, when you wrote, "I know what I owe," what did you mean? Daniel. I meant I knew Margaret felt I owed her. Judge Laika. That is a very different meaning from the ordinary meaning of those words. Daniel. I was trying to calm her down. Judge Laika. Were you telling her something you knew was untrue? Daniel's eyes widened. Daniel. No. Judge Laika. Then what did you know you owed? Daniel looked at the floor. Daniel. I knew I had received money. Judge Laika. And did you believe that money had to be repaid? Daniel's voice became lower. Daniel. I believed I should repay something. Judge Laika. Something? Daniel. Yes. Judge Laika. What does something mean? Daniel shook his head. Daniel. I do not have the number. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. The answer clearly hurt her. Judge Laika did not raise her voice. She did not accuse Daniel of lying, but her questions made the uncertainty visible. Then the judge asked Margaret about the amount she was seeking. Judge Laika. Ms. Hill, you are asking for $120,000. Is that the total amount you gave Mr. Brooks, or the amount still unpaid? Margaret. It is the amount still unpaid. A quiet murmur moved through the audience. Daniel turned toward her. Daniel. That cannot be right. Judge Laika. Mr. Brooks, do not interrupt. Margaret continued. Margaret. I gave him more than that over time. He made some payments, but what remains is $120,000. Judge Laika looked carefully at the documents. Judge Laika. Have you subtracted every payment shown in the records? Margaret. Yes. Judge Laika. Are you asking for interest? Margaret. No. Judge Laika. Are you asking for additional damages? Margaret. No. I want the money I believe is still owed. Daniel shook his head. Daniel. She never gave me that much. Margaret looked at him. Margaret. You know that is not true. Daniel. I know you gave me money. I do not know that you gave me $120,000. Judge Laika looked toward the bank withdrawals. Judge Laika. Mr. Brooks, do you dispute these withdrawals? Daniel. I dispute what they prove. Judge Laika. What do you believe they prove? Daniel. That she took money out of her account, not that every dollar went to me. That was the first clear challenge to the evidence. Margaret's face tightened. She said the withdrawals were not random. They matched conversations, dates, and needs Daniel had described. The eyewitness supported part of her story. The messages supported another part. The records did not stand alone. They formed a chain. Judge Laika wrote several notes. For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely worried. 35 minutes to 40 minutes, narrator. The room had been listening for more than half an hour, and no one seemed ready to leave. That is rare in a courtroom. Most people shift in their seats. They look at the clock. They wait for the next case. But this case had pulled everyone in. Perhaps it was because many people understood the danger of lending money to someone they love. Perhaps it was because both Margaret and Daniel looked like ordinary people who had never expected their private disagreement to become public. Judge Laika asked Daniel to describe his relationship with Margaret during the years when the payments were made. Daniel said they spoke often. He said they helped each other in different ways. He said Margaret had sometimes asked for favors, and he had sometimes given her money without expecting anything in return. He said that was why he believed the transfers were not connected to one single loan. Judge Laika: did you ever tell Ms. Hill that you considered the money a gift? Daniel: not directly. Judge Laika: did you ever write that the money was a gift? Daniel: no. Judge Laika: did you ever tell the eyewitness that the money was a gift? Daniel: I do not remember. Judge Laika: did you ever tell anyone that Ms. Hill had no right to ask for repayment? Daniel looked toward the back of the room. Daniel: not until this dispute. Judge Laika turned to Margaret. Judge Laika: Ms. Hill, did you ever tell Mr. Brooks that the money was a gift? Margaret: no. Judge Laika: did you ever forgive the debt? Margaret: no. Judge Laika: did you ever tell him he did not need to pay? Margaret: never. The judge looked at the two of them. Judge Laika: that distinction matters. Daniel leaned forward. Daniel: I never understood that I had to pay the full amount all at once. Margaret: I never asked for it all at once until you stopped paying. Daniel: you changed the deal. Margaret: no, you changed the deal. Daniel's face reddened. Daniel: you waited 20 years and then came here with old records. Margaret: I waited because you kept promising. Judge Laika's voice became firm. Judge Laika: enough. Both became silent. Judge Laika said the hearing was not a place to punish each other with old arguments. She said the court had to look at actions, records, and statements. She asked Daniel whether he had ever requested a complete accounting from Margaret. Daniel: no. Judge Laika: did you ever say, I do not owe you anything? Daniel: I said the amount was wrong. Judge Laika: did you continue making payments after saying that? Daniel paused. Daniel: I made one payment. Judge Laika: why? Daniel: to show that I was not refusing to help. Judge Laika: or to make a payment toward what you owed. Daniel looked down. Daniel: I do not know. That answer was difficult to hear, not because it proved everything, but because it showed how far apart the two people had become. Margaret seemed to believe every payment carried one meaning. Daniel now claimed the same payments could mean something else. Judge Laika asked Margaret what she wanted from the court beyond the money. Margaret looked surprised. Then she answered honestly. Margaret: I want the court to say that I was not foolish for trusting him. The room fell completely silent. That was the most personal thing she had said all day, and even Daniel looked away. Narrator: Judge Laika took a short break to review the documents. When the hearing continued, Margaret sat with both hands folded tightly in her lap. Daniel looked more tired than angry. His shoulders had dropped. The sharp confidence he had shown earlier was gone. Judge Laika began by reviewing what she believed was not disputed. She said Daniel had received money from Margaret. He had made payments to her. He had sent messages referring to money he owed. He had asked for more time. The disputed questions were the total amount, the terms of repayment, and whether the money had been a loan or a gift. Judge Laika asked Margaret about the first payment again. Judge Laika: Ms. Hill, tell me the exact words you remember from the first agreement. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, trying to remember. Margaret: I told him I could help, but I could not give away my savings. I told him I needed the money back. He said he understood. He said he would pay me over 20 years. Judge Laika: Did he use the word loan? Margaret: Yes. Daniel immediately reacted. Daniel: I do not remember saying that. Judge Laika: Mr. Brooks, did you use the word loan? Daniel thought for a long moment. Daniel: I may have. Judge Laika: May have? Daniel: It was 20 years ago. Judge Laika: Do you remember receiving the money? Daniel: Yes. Judge Laika: Do you remember promising to repay some of it? Daniel: Yes. Judge Laika: Then what exactly do you deny? Daniel stared at the table. Daniel: I deny that we agreed on the amount she is claiming today. Margaret leaned forward. Margaret: You knew the amount. You watched me count it. Judge Laika looked at her. Judge Laika: Were you both present when the money was counted? Margaret: Yes. Judge Laika: Was anyone else present? Margaret: Not for every payment, but the eyewitness was there for one of our conversations. Judge Laika: Did the eyewitness see the entire amount? Margaret: No. Judge Laika: Then the eyewitness can support the conversation, but not necessarily the full calculation. Margaret nodded. Margaret: I understand. That was important. She was not pretending the evidence proved more than it did. She accepted the judge's limits. Daniel noticed that too. Judge Laika returned to the text messages. She asked Daniel whether he had ever corrected Margaret when she described the money as a loan. Daniel: I told her the amount was not right. Judge Laika: Did you say this was never a loan? Daniel: No. Judge Laika: Did you say you gave me a gift? Daniel: No. Judge Laika: Did you say I do not owe you anything? Daniel looked down. Daniel: No. Judge Laika leaned back. The answer did not settle the case, but it placed Daniel in a difficult position. For years, he had acted like someone who owed money. Only after Margaret demanded the remaining balance had he challenged the nature of the agreement. That delay did not automatically decide the case, but it mattered. Margaret's breathing became slower. Daniel looked toward her. For the first time that day, his expression showed something close to regret. Narrator: The judge asked one final set of questions about the year 2023. Margaret explained that she had reached a point where she could no longer wait. She had expenses of her own. Her savings were lower than they should have been. She said she had spent years believing Daniel would make things right. Then she realized that waiting without a clear answer was putting her own future at risk. She sent him a written demand. She did not threaten him. She asked him to meet with her and review the records. She wanted to settle the issue privately, but Daniel refused to accept her calculation. Judge Laika: Mr. Brooks, why did you refuse to review the records with her? Daniel: I did not trust the records. Judge Laika: Did you explain which records you disputed? Daniel: No. Judge Laika: Did you provide your own records? Daniel: I did not have them. Judge Laika: Did you offer a different amount? Daniel: No. Judge Laika: What did you offer? Daniel's jaw tightened. Daniel, I told her I could not pay $120,000. Judge Laika, that is not an offer. Daniel said nothing. Margaret's face showed exhaustion. Margaret, I asked him to sit down with me. I told him we could look at every payment. I told him I did not want to fight. Daniel, you wanted me to sign something saying I owed you. Margaret, I wanted you to acknowledge what happened. Daniel, I could not acknowledge a number I did not agree with. Margaret, but you would not show me your number? Daniel looked away. The room felt divided. Some people looked sympathetic toward Margaret. Others watched Daniel with concern. It was clear that nobody believed this was a simple story of a good person and a bad person. Daniel looked like someone who had accepted help and then lost control of the situation. Margaret looked like someone who had trusted too long and now had no choice but to demand accountability. Judge Laika asked Margaret whether she had calculated the unpaid balance herself. Margaret, yes. Judge Laika, did anyone help you? Margaret, no. Judge Laika, did you include payments that were not clearly connected to the loan? Margaret, I tried not to. Judge Laika, what does that mean? Margaret opened her folder. Margaret, if I was unsure, I did not subtract it. I only counted payments that Daniel identified as part of the money he owed. Daniel turned sharply toward her. Daniel, I never identified them that way. Margaret, you wrote that you were paying me back. Daniel, I wrote that I was helping. Judge Laika, Mr. Brooks, your messages do not use only one word. Some refer to help and some refer to owing. That is why the court must look at the whole pattern. Judge Laika reviewed the documents for several moments. Then she said something that made Margaret lift her head. Judge Laika, Ms. Hill, I find your testimony concerning the original promise credible in several important respects. But I am still examining whether the full amount has been proven. Margaret nodded. Daniel sat very still. The outcome was no longer certain. Margaret had gained ground, but the judge was not going to award money simply because she felt sorry for her. The evidence had to support the amount. And that was where the case could still turn. Narrator. Judge Laika went through the bank records one more time. She compared the withdrawals with the messages. She compared the payments from Daniel with Margaret's accounting. She looked at the eyewitness information. The room was silent except for the quiet sound of papers moving. Margaret stared straight ahead. Daniel kept his hands folded. I could see both of them trying to prepare for the decision. Margaret's face held hope, but also fear. Daniel's face held worry. Neither person knew whether the judge would accept the full $120,000 claim. Judge Laika finally looked up. Judge Laika, I am going to explain my findings carefully. Margaret took a deep breath. Daniel looked at the judge. Judge Laika, the evidence shows that Mr. Brooks received substantial financial assistance from Ms. Hill. The bank records support the movement of money. The payment history supports an understanding that at least some repayment was expected. The text messages also show that Mr. Brooks knew Ms. Hill believed he owed her money and that he did not clearly reject that understanding for many years. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Daniel looked down. Judge Laika. The evidence also supports Ms. Hill's testimony that the two of them discussed repayment over a long period. The eyewitness account supports part of that testimony. Margaret pressed her lips together. Then Judge Laika continued. Judge Laika, however, the court must separate what is emotionally understandable from what is legally proven. The original agreement was oral. There was no fixed written payment schedule, no written final balance, and no single document showing that the unpaid amount was exactly $120,000. Margaret's face fell. Daniel looked up. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he believed he had won. But Judge Laika was not finished. Judge Laika, that does not mean Mr. Brooks received the money as a gift. It does not erase the payments he made. It does not explain his repeated statements that he owed money or needed more time. Daniel's expression changed again. Judge Laika, the question is not whether a debt existed. The evidence strongly supports that it did. The question is the amount that has been proven. Margaret began to cry silently. She kept her eyes down. Judge Laika softened her voice. Judge Laika, Ms. Hill, I understand that you believe the full amount is clear, but a court must rely on evidence that can be measured and checked. Margaret nodded. Margaret, I understand, Judge. Her voice was almost a whisper. Judge Laika turned to Daniel. Judge Laika, Mr. Brooks, you cannot avoid responsibility simply because the agreement was not written. Your own actions show that you understood repayment was expected. Daniel swallowed. Daniel, I understand. Judge Laika, do you? Daniel looked toward Margaret. Daniel, I understand that she believed I owed her. Judge Laika, no, I'm asking whether you understand that your conduct contributed to this dispute. Daniel said nothing. The judge continued. Judge Laika, you accepted money, you made payments, you told her you had not forgotten what you owed. You asked for more time. Then, when she demanded a complete accounting, you challenged the entire arrangement without producing a clear alternative. Daniel's eyes became wet. He looked embarrassed. Daniel, I did not mean for it to reach this point. Judge Laika, intent does not erase consequences. The room became completely still. That sentence seemed to reach both of them. Margaret had trusted Daniel for years. Daniel had avoided a difficult conversation for years. Now the judge was forcing the past into the open. Narrator, Judge Laika gave her final decision. She ruled that Margaret had shown enough evidence to prove that the money was given as a loan or financial obligation, not as a gift. She found that Daniel had received money and had made partial repayments. She also found that his messages and actions supported Margaret's claim that repayment had been expected. But Judge Laika did not award the full $120,000. She said the exact remaining balance had not been proven with enough certainty. Instead, she calculated the amount supported by the bank records, the documented payments, and the clearest evidence connected to the agreement. The amount was lower than Margaret had requested, but it was still substantial. Judge Laika ordered Daniel to pay Margaret the proven balance according to the court's schedule. She also told both parties that the order was not a suggestion. It was a judgment. Margaret listened with tears running down her face. She did not look happy. She looked relieved, but also heartbroken. Daniel sat frozen for several seconds. Then he slowly nodded. Judge Laika, Mr. Brooks, you are responsible for the amount ordered today. You are not being punished for accepting help. You are being held responsible for failing to honor the repayment understanding that your own conduct supported. Daniel looked at Margaret. Daniel, I am sorry. Margaret did not answer right away. The judge looked at her. Judge Laika, Ms. Hill, you do not have to respond. Margaret wiped her face. Margaret, I did not want to bring him here. I wanted him to remember what he promised. Daniel lowered his head. Daniel, I should have talked to you. Margaret. Yes, you should have. Judge Laika gave them both a moment. Then she spoke calmly. Judge Laika. Promises made between people may not always be written on paper, but that does not mean they have no meaning. At the same time, anyone who lends a large amount of money should protect themselves with clear written terms. Trust is valuable, but trust should not be the only record. Margaret nodded. Daniel kept his eyes down. Judge Laika closed the case. The room began to move again. People stood slowly. Chairs shifted. Papers were gathered. But Margaret remained seated for a moment. She placed her hand on the folder containing the bank records and text messages. Those pages had carried her through years of doubt. They had been the only proof she had when Daniel said the agreement did not exist. As she stood, Daniel came near her. He did not touch her. He simply stood a few feet away. Daniel, I never wanted to hurt you. Margaret looked at him. Margaret, but you did. Daniel's face tightened. Daniel, I know. Margaret looked toward the judge's bench, then back at Daniel. Margaret, I hope you pay what the judge ordered, not because I want to see you suffer, because I need you to keep one promise. Daniel nodded slowly. Daniel. I will try. Margaret's eyes filled again. Margaret. Do not try, do it. Daniel looked down. That was the last direct exchange I heard between them. As people left the room, I kept thinking about Margaret's words. She had not asked for revenge. She had asked for recognition. She wanted the court to say that she had not imagined the agreement. She had not invented the payments. She had not misunderstood every message. Judge Laika's decision did not give Margaret everything she wanted, but it did confirm something important. The money had not been a gift. Daniel had accepted help, understood that repayment was expected, and allowed the disagreement to continue for years without giving Margaret a clear answer. In my view, the judge's decision was fair. She did not simply accept the emotional story and award the full amount without proof, but she also did not allow Daniel to hide behind the fact that the agreement was spoken instead of written. The evidence showed a real obligation. Margaret's tears truly moved me, not because she was older, not because she was emotional, but because she had trusted someone for 20 years and had to come to court just to prove that her trust had not been meaningless. And there is a lesson in what happened. If you lend a large amount of money, even to someone you love, write down the terms, write the amount, write the payment plan, write the final date. Do not assume that a long friendship will protect you from a future disagreement. Sometimes people remember the same conversation in completely different ways. And sometimes when the money is gone, the only thing standing between truth and denial is a message, a bank record, or one person who remembers what was said. So now I want to ask you, was Judge Laika right to award Margaret only the amount supported by the records? Or should Daniel have been ordered to pay the full $120,000? Leave your opinion in the comments and tell me honestly. Would you ever lend a close friend or family member a large amount of money without a written agreement? Because after watching what happened in that courtroom, I know one thing for sure. A promise may begin with trust. But when money is involved, trust should always be followed by proof.